So today I want to focus on the red panel model 158. I think it's an amazing oscillator, and despite its shortcomings and the fact that it's quite limited compared to current standards, I absolutely love it. I think it sounds amazing, and if you can live with the fact that yes, you kind of need a few support modules to really make the most of it, well, you'll be greeted with amazing FM timbers. And speaking of support module, you kind of get two demos in one today, because we are going to use the control voltage processor from Verbos and see how this module can really help push the 158 much further. By itself, it's an amazing drone machine. As you can hear right now, it's frequency modulating itself. Of course, you can move the knobs, but that's about all the control you have. Because as soon as you flick the switch for external control, it disables the knobs, the frequency knobs. So basically you're left with a LFO without frequency control, which isn't really useful. Speaking of the knobs, those are custom made and really nice. Basically it's a really nicely made module and great sounding. So the controls are wave shape, goes from sine wave to so-ish, at least it's more buzzing than the sine wave. Frequency modulation, so you have to patch it yourself, but then the first oscillator is modulating the second one, and you can cross-modulate with the second one modulating the first one. So this frequency modulation, and this is cross-modulation. It can get really crazy, because it's a 60s oscillator, it breaks, it doesn't really work at the extremities, but if you like these crazy timbers, there's a lot of sound in there. And so I think it's a useful module because if you like FM, if you like complex timbers, it's quite small and it can still work in a palette type case. Throw an LPG in there and you have an amazing percussive voice. You can always put a couple offsets, because offsets and mixer are really essential with this module if you want to apply CV to it. Otherwise it's just going to be manual control and droning, amazing beating oscillators. But yeah, either you animate downstream with the filters, with whatever effects you want to use, but if you really want to use CV on the module and just input a basic sequence to have some sort of melody, then you will need an offset and you will need a mixer such as the control voltage processor. Okay, let's start at the very beginning with the 158, with it in its basic state just droning away. So here's the sine wave, which you can turn into a slow saw wave with the knob. There's no CV control over that knob. Frequency control. And so if you want frequency modulation from the other oscillator, you just patch oscillator A into modulation B. Any interval you want to find, you have to find them by hand. But I can tell you right now, this is not really an oscillator for melodic stuff. But it's a frequency modulation monster. Or droning monster. So if you flick the switch, these two are going to be disabled, and it's basically like they're like that. So all you get are clicks, which isn't very musically interesting. Okay, so now there's the control voltage processor right next to it. So what we can do with this? First of all, you can control the amount of frequency modulation you apply from oscillator A to oscillator B, pretty much like the modulation index on any complex oscillator. So you can put that in the crossfader. Yes, let's do it like that. And then put it into oscillator A modulation input. So this now will be an attenuator, and this will choose the amount of modulation. And so now you can do that with CV. So, kind of a mess, but you get my point. Okay, so that's the first thing you can do. Just turning this basic oscillator into something a bit more controllable. Although the kind of control we were applying to it right now isn't to control. So next thing we can do is try to input a basic sequence. So if you want to use an external input, you have to flick the switch to external. And like I said, the knobs will be like this, so you'll get LFO, basically clicks. So what you need to do is, first of all, offset your oscillator. So this one has an input with an attenuator, a second one, and a crossfader, and the last one is an offset. So if you put it into the frequency input, this will be now your base frequency. So it's an offset. Any kind of offset will work. Anything from IntelliGel, Mutable, Vermuna. I mean, it's an offset, +5, -5. Maybe this one goes to +10, I'm not sure. So let's say we want it here. We can do the same thing with second one. We won't hear it now because we're just monitoring the first one. Well, second one, sorry. And so now, if we want to apply a sequence, we can take the CV, I'll use the multi-stage. And then we can scale the sequence. But as you can hear, there's sort of a slew in there. Let's use an envelope. So this is still just one oscillator, oscillator B. I'm used to the complex oscillator, so I'm using that one as the main oscillator and this one as the carrier, but nothing stops you from switching it up. And so now, let's say we want to apply frequency modulation. So on top of the sequence, we want to apply the outputs of the first oscillator, oscillator A, the carrier, to the frequency modulation, frequency control of oscillator B. So we take one output from A and then choose the amount. And then this knob, the offset, is our frequency of the oscillator A. Sounds a bit convoluted, and I mean, it's quite a complicated patch just for getting FM tones, but that's what you have to work with if you like this oscillator. But then you get what I think is a great sounding oscillator. It's really too bad you don't have CV control over the sine so wave shaper, because I think there would be a lot to find in there. I think the so sound amazing. Let's cut the filter so we have the pure oscillator sound. Okay, so while we're at it, we might as well try to do something musical with this oscillator. So something I quite like to do, and I think there's already a video on YouTube about that, if you look on my channel, is to use these two oscillators in stereo. So just take each output, pan left and right. I'm using the scan and pan because it's, as its name suggests, quite perfect for the job. And then we can pan that automatically with some LFO just to animate stuff. So I'm using a couple of trapezoid from Batumi. So that's the oscillator straight into the mixer, so it's droning away, there's no CV, there's no filter, just the oscillator beating against each other. And so what we can do, we still have our sequence from before and in the CVP, so I can plug that into the modulation input because the switch is down, so basically that input doesn't work anymore. So it's either the knob or the input. So here I have control of the knobs, so if I want to control some frequency modulation, I need to plug that into the frequency modulation input. So we have this little percussive sequence, and now we can just start to add some drums. I don't have a stereo filter, I don't really care, but since this is very based on stereo, let's use a filter. I'm gonna use a VST, Filter Freak, to give some acidness to this. I think you'd agree this oscillator makes amazing drones. It's cool to have a filter downstream to animate stuff a bit more because the oscillator is quite limited. Let's remove Filter Freak. And this is dry, so let's go overboard, bring back Filter Freak and add some space and L cap stand. The CV modulation from voltage multistage almost makes our drone, and in the back we have sort of toms, which you could always, with some EQ in the DAW, bring back or bring forth, I mean. It's the illusion of having more than just one oscillator. Cool trick to do as well in your computer, or if you have a mid-side processor, because the stereo thing is so much with the LFO, it's good to have a bass mono. So in Ableton there's a basic utility that does that, but if you have a mid-side little module, you can just run that to a high-pass filter and it will do the trick. But honestly, it's much easier to do this with the utility in Ableton. So yeah, little musical, drone-y, techno-y patch. Let's do another one. Okay, so I want to use the control voltage processor to show you now how you can apply slew on your sequence, and also how you can apply complicated modulation to modules that have only one input for modulation, for example. So the first thing here is the CVA from the voltage multistage is going into the upper part of the control voltage processor, which is a slew, so much like math or rampage or function. You have a tag decay, you have the shape, and you have the bounce feature, which is pretty unique to this module. So let's put everything to 0. You can hear how it's impacting the sequence I have on the voltage multistage. And actually, it's quite a performative tool. It can be quite useful to move your sequence from something to something else with the envelope. You can make it a bit more percussive. Bear in mind that the shape knob kind of changes the pitch, so if you're doing something very pitch specific, maybe this is not the best module for you. You can hear it now, changing somewhat the pitch. So it's slowing my CV and making it different. And so the bounce feature, Verbos describes it as something that's sort of putting your finger on a tape head or something. So let's hear it. I think it's a somewhat accurate description. It's sometimes more pronounced. In any case, it's worth experimenting with. So that's our sequence. Not amazing, but we'll work with that. And so the second part of the CV processor basically just offsets and sends the sequence to my oscillator, so like we did in the previous patch. And now we're just gonna close the filter and apply the modulation we have. So let's unplug all this. First of all, my VMS, my sequencer, voltage multistage, is sending gates to the envelope, of course, but I've copied the gates to the trigger of the quantized random. And so the quantized random, there's a new value every time there's a gate for the envelope. And so I'm applying this to the cutoff. You can hear it moving cutoff knob. And so then I took a second envelope, not the same one using the opening the VCA, but another one. And so I'm plugging that into the CV processor and mixing that with the random. And so these are both gonna open my frequency of the cutoff of the filter. And then as a third part, I took the reference output from the voltage multistage as well. So if you remember the demo from the voltage multistage, it's a quick envelope. And so I'm plugging this into the crossfader, and I'm using the other quantized random from the from the random sampling to crossfade basically between nothing and the reference output. So it's more of a VCA than a crossfader, because it's not crossfading between two values, but between 0 and my value. So you can hear these three different modulation working together, fighting together, and creating sort of a pattern. So, like I've said a million times, you can build these blocks with anything else. It's really basic stuff. It's just very useful in the modular system. The control voltage processor is super useful. If you work with verbos, it's fine because the offsets are 10 volts, which isn't very common. But otherwise, crossfader, offsets, mixers, attenuators, they're quite easy to come by. Same with the slew. It's just convenient to have everything in one package. And if we go back to the oscillator, actually, there's sort of a similar module to this one, just the two bottom parts. But there's a companion module that's called the 156, I believe. And so really, if you want to make the most of the red panel 158, you need either that, a 156, or a mix and match of modules, because otherwise you'll be stuck with drones and no CV control, which can be nice, but you might as well have everything. Okay, here's the last little patch I wanted to do. I think the 158 really pairs well with the LPG. So we're going to use LXD in this case. So far we were using the amplitude and tone controller, which can be an LPG but doesn't have that bongo perfect percussion quality of the LXD, which is honestly amazing. So what we're going to do here is take advantage of the multitude of outputs of the oscillator and take one oscillator, create something with it, and then take another output and create another thing with it to have something somewhat full from just one oscillator. So what you can hear right now is a gate pattern going directly into the strike input of the first LPG and the LXD, the 12 dB. So that's my gate pattern with the switches. We can add the 7th gate into the CV to create some sort of accent. Once again, I think I've made a video where I think it's titled VMS Workout, and it's sort of the same idea with different modules, but LXD is very much at the heart of the thing as well. So we have this little pattern, which is okay. Let's bring some delay. Always better. And then in the second part of the LXD, I've used the BinSec, which is basically the switches part of the VMS, a small trigger sequencer with gate and trigger. So there's another pattern here, and I'm going, so let's unplug this. I'm going into the strike input of the 6 dB LPG, then that's going into the input of the bark filter, and the bark filter is going into the T resonator, which is off screen. Let's bring that up. And since the first sound is pretty bassy and percussive, I've used mostly higher bands in the bark filter processor so that everything is its space. And I'm going to use the CVB of the voltage multistage to create an accent into the second sequence. The T resonator is acting as a delay and filter. And so there's this cable too, which is going from the sequence selector, the CV out, which I'm clocking with different gate outputs of the voltage multistage. So the CV out is going into the center input on the bark filter. To just give some bursts of lower frequency content, but not too much because, like I said, there's already the first sound. And so that's it basically, but I think it sounds amazing. Good basis for a track or anything. You could always animate the bark filter a bit more. This isn't really the purpose of this demo, but let's do it anyway because it's fun. I mean, just one oscillator, LPG, couple of effects. Of course, I mean, the bark filter is pretty hefty module, but you can fake it with different stuff like a basic noise and filter or even just a filter. Some delay, atmosphere, some reverb, you're in outer space. Honestly, I can't get enough of the LXD and this oscillator. It's just too good. That's without any sequence, it's just sending a drone. Screw the features. We just want the sound. Yeah, that's it for this video. I think, well, I hope you liked it. LXD 158, perfect pairing, but basically any complex oscillator, LXD, perfect pairing. Any kind of percussive sound is there in this 4 HP. So yeah, you got an overview of the complex oscillator, an overview of that oscillator. Once again, it's limited. It is what it is, but it sounds amazing. So there's a decision to make here. And yeah, I did. I got it. It's useful in a small system. Honestly, I quite like it. I think there's a great many tones in there. It works for me because my music, as I said, isn't very focused on the melody, but maybe it's going to work for you, who knows. Then again, Red Panel, I don't really know what they're up to. They don't seem to be in the stores that much. I know everybody has problems with supply chains in these troubled times, so I don't know, maybe they're around. In any case, I really love the module. Get it if you want. So once again, if you like the video, don't hesitate to subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you think of the 158, of the CVP, the control voltage processor. Remember that these things are really basic building blocks. I'm sure you all have the same elements in your system already, and the idea is just to get inspired, not especially to add new gear. With that said, the 158 is quite unique. It's sort of complex, but still it's just two basic oscillators. It's quirky, it's missing obvious features, but it has some charm, has some amazing sound that is hard to just ignore. So yeah, I had to try it for myself. There are very few demos of this online, so hopefully this one, even if it's not complete, there's no Mordax data involved, you won't see the waveforms. Just use your ears. I know there are effects, I know it's pretty much what I do with it more than the demo, but hopefully it gives an idea. So I hope you liked it. And if you really liked it and you'd like to see me make more of these demos, I have a Patreon which you can join. You can have samples from these demos and the previous demos. You can have lesson with me one-to-one about modular if you're starting in modular and want some guidelines, or even if you're more experienced and just want to talk about how I make music. So feel free to support me there. I will see you in about a couple of weeks for a new video. Until then, cheers.